Oh great heavens. Quite the big Fujimoto curveball that I don't think anyone could have guessed. We had our ideas, we had our theories, but this one completely came out of nowhere. It's very typical of him to do this, and he knocked it out of the park. Really just nailing the idea that we can never really comprehend what Fujimoto's next move is going to be. Starting off, I want to address the elephant in the room. We have what seems to be another horseman, and now we can, I guess, kind of feel comfortable about the idea of all the horsemen having swirly eye indicators. That's Makima, Yoru, Naoyuta, and now this new horseman. It's never been addressed, but we've had this idea prior. Now for me, this kind of just cements it fully, without any sort of deviation whatsoever. Who is this horseman, you ask? Your first thought might have gone to Death, specifically because the chapter puts Yuko in a really bad position, she's about to die, and this person comes up and offers to resurrect her, bringing her back from death. You see the bigger picture. She also mentions that Asa or Yoru is her little sister, and I've seen a lot of people's interpretation of this, that death and war kind of have this sibling-like relationship. For the most part, Fujimoto has a ton of creative liberty when it comes to the Four Horsemen and the legitimacy of them. I don't think he's pulling directly out of whatever sort of lore you want to give them, because there is seemingly a lot of lore, a lot of different interpretations, variations. Some even have 5 horsemen, some change out control and famine and death. So there's a lot of different combinations that you could go for, and Fujimoto seems like he's just picking and choosing and creating this consistent ground line between all of them. Now, this kind of gives us the better idea that all of the horsemen treat each other like siblings, most likely because they're on a much higher pedestal than everyone else, the normal devils, but still, in my opinion, below the primordial fears. I don't actually think this horseman is death, however. I believe them to be famine, and there's 2 kind of massive indicators for this, and a couple of smaller ones that help kind of build the idea a little more for myself, right? First and foremost, in a lot of depictions, famine is depicted with a symbolism surrounding balance. One thing that caught my eye, and probably a lot of you straight off the get-go, is her earrings. They look exactly like Pochita's tail or Denji's ripcord within his chest, and they have this little counterbalance thing within the middle. I zoomed in on that while kind of creating a thumbnail, and it has this weird symbol twist or braid within there. Kind of looks like a scale. I'm definitely reaching on that department because it's so obscure and low quality when you zoom all the way in, but you definitely can see some sort of twist or braid within that earring or weight. The ripcord, however, being Pochita's tail or Denji's ripcord, to me is kind of a prized possession. So we know that the Horseman and Pochita or Chainsaw Man has fought countless times before. We don't know necessarily how many, but they've been in war with each other for quite some time. And when you think about it, it's kind of scary how well they equal out. Pochita or Chainsaw Man is able to go toe to toe with all the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse and all of their weaponry, but it's not like a clear wash. It's not something that Pochita just gets obliterated or all the Horsemen get obliterated. It seems like a pretty even tug of war type of situation that we really know nothing about. The reason I mention this, I think those earrings are kind of spoils of war, basically injuring Pochita to a point where he loses his tail or the ripcord out of like the human variation of the chest, and this Horseman has used it to decorate their body. The reasoning, however, for this could be anything. This Horseman could love Pochita or Chainsaw Man, have some sort of infatuation for him, or hate him so much she wears the spoils of war. More so, the reason I would love this to be famine for narrative context, theoretically famine should play an opposite, symbolically, to both Denji and Chainsaw Man, with Denji's love for food and Pochita or Chainsaw Man's ability also representing that by devouring people he erases them from existence. You can imagine famine not being a person that is able to potentially eat because of the abilities that they have. They may not even need to eat. And when I think about the potential conflict that just that idea alone kind of brews, makes me very intrigued for the duality of that conflict. For a over-exaggerated example, imagine famine taking away Denji's hunger and how annoyed he would get because of that, because he loves food. This may also actually work as a hard counter for Chainsaw Man in terms of devouring people and erasing them. On top of that, you could probably add that maybe she's jealous of Chainsaw Man for being able to devour so much food, whereas she can't. Just some silly loose ideas. So contextually, I believe this Horseman to be famine, based on how the narrative is unfolding, how in order the reveals of the Horsemen have been, starting with control, then war, then famine, then death. There doesn't seem to be some sort of power gauge or hierarchy. One could only assume that death would be much higher, specifically because of how much fear would actually go into that moment. One of the scariest things that you would ever experience within your life isn't control, isn't famine, isn't war, but a lot of those are close. But the last component, the very thing that kind of lingers within all of those things, all of those horsemen, is death. Then again, again, I could play the other side and say that this is a perfect way to hide the exterior nature of death, decay, and all of its components by putting her into a young teenage girl. It sounds right up Fujimoto's alleyway. Regardless on who this horseman is, we have another one, and I am very, very excited to see how this now unfolds because they're also a part of Asa's school. So now we have Yoru, the war devil. We have Asa, who's able to wield some of the abilities of Yoru, which is amazing. I'll get onto that in a moment. We now have another horseman. We have Denji, we have Yoshida, and then we also have the new control devil within Denji's vicinity to some degree. We have yet to see her, but I assume we will soon. Thinking about this is pretty wild, and it's all taking place within this school basically. And it's most likely because they know that Chainsaw Man is here. They can't directly pinpoint who it is or where it is, but they know that it's in here because he spends the most time here. Last thing to add on to this whole horseman talk, I would actually love if death itself wasn't actually human and more so just concept that lingers within every single horseman. So the three physical embodiments of it would be control, war, and famine, but because all of those have a significant factor of death within it, especially war and famine, that is where the power kind of lingers for the death horseman. And when enough death is caused by all of the horsemen, maybe it could all gather and spawn in the final horseman. Not as some sort of final boss situation, but more of a signifier of this is the end of everything. This is the Grim Reaper of the story. Yet realistically, because devils don't really die, there must be something else there that makes death very scary. A subset of abilities, which we've seen every horseman have. Honestly, if you were to compare the horseman that is Death and Chainsaw Man, you can see that they're very similar to each other. One is just very extreme, that is Chainsaw Man. Erasing things from existence is ridiculous. It's what I consider to be extinction, and why I believe Pochita is quite literally the extinction primordial fear. And I think it'd be a great way to introduce the idea that devils, horsemen, and primordial fears can all be attached into one. They don't have to be separated into different categories. We have yet to see that. And it would make sense that the one very odd individual, being Pochita and Chainsaw Man, is one of the most powerful to exist within the story, and they're just considered a normal devil. Apologies, enough of the horseman theory talk. This chapter was extremely good. It gave us a lot of information for how the horsemen work, but more specifically how Yoru and Asa are going to, I guess, combine forces over time. They've bridged within this chapter really well. We find out that Yuko didn't actually give anything to gain the Justice Devil's ability. A little bit weird. Usually it's a give-take system or a contract of sorts, but this seems more imposing. Almost like Yuko allowed the Justice Devil to completely take over her body to gain all of these abilities with no real hindrance in return, if that makes sense. But you can definitely tell her perception of justice extremely warped. One of the most beautiful moments of this chapter is Asa turning her own uniform into a weapon. Now you would think, wow, this moment is really cool. Her weapon is probably really weak, however. This isn't actually the case. It kind of comes off like that as first. Yoru downplays it as well, and she attacks Yuko. Quite literally, right after, Yuko explodes into like 1,000 little pieces. This sword is extremely powerful, and the reason for that is that the uniform Asa is wearing was bought by her mother before she passed. I think this is going to be a massive thing for Yoru because she comments on top of this saying that she never had a sword become that powerful. Think about this for a second. If Yoru could not have a strong emotional connection or guilt to people to turn them into weapons, what better way to do it than have Asa be emotionally connected to people, and for Asa to turn them into weapons, to become so incredibly powerful because she feels so strongly. This distinction between abilities also makes me think that Yoru can't actually use Asa's body and or emotions to create very powerful weapons that she isn't connected with. Does that make sense? So basically, Asa and her emotions can create powerful weapons, and Yoru and her emotions can create powerful weapons, but they can't intertwine. Maybe a little bit, but not to the full extent. If they become closer, maybe the merge will be a lot more identifiable. This is when the mysterious horseman comes in and asks if Yuko wants to be revived. Side note, any horseman should be able to theoretically do this, not just Death. Famine can also probably do this, as well as Yoru and even Control Devil. Again, they have these extra abilities that attach to their being. I wouldn't put it past any of them to be able to do this very easily. Yuko's kept alive, but she has grown massively, which is another indicator why I think this is famine. Not to keep going back here, but the fertility of crops is quite literally part of famine's arsenal. To grow things, to nurture things, but to also take away. It's a balancing act, and you've seen that with war, you've seen that with control, and you're probably probably see it with Death as well. The Devil Hunters are now here, but still no sign of Denji and Yoshida. Personally, I really love the Yuko dialogue as well, how she said she wanted to be a symbol of hope or a beacon of light, similar to Chainsaw Man. So she would take it upon herself to do all of these horrendous things by stopping and killing bullies, and hopefully the fear of that would stop bullying globally, or at least within Japan. For me, it makes Yuko's actions and intention a lot more nuanced. She was genuinely thinking about a much bigger goal. However, again, her perception of justice is extremely warped, and she is the judge, jury, and executioner, which no one should have that much power. I almost forgot to mention the underwear situation. Personally, I don't have a problem with this, but if it makes you feel uncomfortable, you don't like it, you think it's weird, that's okay. It's entirely up to you. I do think there is a genuine intention here though, and not just thrown in there as fan service. There's no real obsessiveness to it or some sort of over-sexualization. Narrative and character-wise, it makes sense, isn't just pulled out of nowhere. And I think it also kind of doubles back as playing into Asa's humility, that she's willing to go this far to humiliate herself to save or to stop someone that she obviously cares about. Within these schools, the bullies, how she's treated, she's willing to go to these lengths. Tie it off, you could throw this directly to Denji and see his reaction to this situation. It actually would show a bit of vulnerability towards Denji if he's grown, if he's matured or changed or something along those lines. He's come a long way, obviously. So maybe that's a way to open up the conversation for it once again. Beautiful, brilliant, very exciting times. There is a chapter next week, so look forward to that. But I would love to hear your thoughts. So please do let me know.